Hi, welcome to Athelmark, digitally. I am Gavin Kent, and I am delighted to have you here with me today for Pennsic University Virtual Take 2, the Foundations of Performing. So glad that you could join me today, and here's to hoping that next year we can all once more be together at Pennsic and enjoy our classes there. Today for the Foundations of Performing, I'd like to talk about the things that go into creating a performance, to having stage presence, the things that can stand in our way, some of the stuff that are myths or legends, and some things that are really good to know, and all of the little tips and tricks that I've put together over my career. Mundanely, my name is Greg Tremblay. I'm a voice actor and audiobook narrator and have been a stage actor and worked in various forms in the past. I studied acting in college, and this is how I make my day job. Mundanely, I'm currently the King's Bard for Athelmark, and so I guess the SCA is a little bit of a busman's holiday for me here and there, but I am delighted to share some performing tips and tricks with you and to create a conversation that can go forward and help you no matter what kind of performance you want to do. I've broken this presentation down into 3 sections: body, mind, and spirit. So let's get started with a discussion of the body and how we can bring it in its best way for us to each performance that we do. Let's get started. For our body section, I've chosen to break this down into 2 areas: the voice and the rest of our physical health. Now, vocal health is something that's incredibly important for a lot of us as performers. Certainly not all performers. We have musical performers, silent stage performers, puppeteers who may not do vocalizations for your puppets, but vocal health is an important component of most people's everyday life. And for those of us that are storytellers, singers, and anyone else that's using stage acting or film acting, our voices are an important part of our repertoire. Our vocal instrument is an amazing thing that we use every day to communicate with people around us. And there's some interesting misunderstanding and misinformation about our vocal instrument, and I'd like to give you a very rough overview of how everything works to create the sound and music that we make with our voice every day. Your vocal folds, which a lot of us will just refer to as our voice box, is part of our larynx, which is located at the top of our trachea. Now, our throat has 2 pipes, one for air, one for food and water. The air pipe, of course, is our trachea, our windpipe. The food and water pipe is our esophagus. Trachea is in the front, esophagus is in the back. And the vocal folds are flaps of muscle that are located at the top of the trachea. So all the air that we breathe and the air that we exhale goes through our vocal folds. Vocal folds or vocal cords are smooth muscle. And that's a different type of muscle than our structural skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle is things that are under our direct conscious control. And that's a little bit confusing because, of course, we consciously control our voice. But when we have a command that we want to send to our skeletal muscles, we can tell our biceps to contract or to extend, and we can move our skeletal muscles. Our smooth muscles, which are also found in parts of the heart and in the insides of our blood vessels, are controlled by our central nervous system as a result of other things that we place demands on our body for. So they're not things that we can intentionally cause to change. They're located just below the epiglottis, which is the floppy thing in the back of our throat, which is a very handy piece of tissue because it closes over our trachea when we eat or drink, which is good because it prevents food and water from going down our trachea into our lungs. It doesn't always do its job perfectly. I'm sure you've all choked on water or inhaled a little bit of food at some time. I know that I certainly have, and it's an incredibly unpleasant experience. But our epiglottis does a pretty great job of taking care of that for the most part. They're longer and shorter, the vocal folds, in different people. By and large, people assigned male at birth tend to have slightly longer vocal folds. Those that were assigned female at birth tend to have slightly shorter. When we're younger, as children, we have shorter vocal folds. And typically, shorter vocal folds are associated with higher pitches that they produce. Long strings, lower pitch. Take the same string, make it shorter, same tension, higher pitch. It's exactly what happens on a guitar or a violin when you fret or finger a string up closer. You shorten the length of that vibrating string, the pitch goes up. Our bodies control our vocal folds by controlling the amount of tension on them. They tense and loosen in order to create different pitches in our voice. So the vibrations that they create as air passes through them create the pitch that we hear when we sing or speak or do anything to create sound with our vocal folds. Pushing air through them at different velocities with different strengths produces different amounts of sound. So the more air we push through, the more volume we get. The less air we push through, the less volume we get. There are certain things at different times of our life and different times of day that change our vocal folds. So early in the morning, those muscles haven't really warmed up. They've been unused while we've been sleeping, assuming you sleep at night. When you wake up, whenever that happens to be, your vocal folds will be a little bit softer, they'll be a little bit looser, they won't be ready to tighten up quite as much. And that's usually when, most of us who are male presenting have our lowest times of day. That's kind of when I get to, fake and sing the bass parts. Late in the day, especially if we've had a busy day talking or singing or performing, our voices will start to get a little bit more raspy. They'll get a little bit drier because those muscles are tired. Just like any other muscle, our vocal fold has a certain amount of work that it can do in a given day. And sometimes we push it a little past what we can do. There are excellent things that we need to do in terms of taking care of our vocal health for performing, and one of those is simply warming up. Warm-ups are not magic. There is nothing that's a specific, you must hit A, B, and C in order to warm up properly. Warm-ups are simply that, bringing blood to the muscles that make up your vocal folds and the surrounding tissue, bringing oxygen, taking away carbon dioxide and waste materials, getting those muscles ready to work, just like warming up before any physical activity. And when you warm up before a physical activity, we don't want to jump straight into maximum work. We want to give them a little bit of time to warm up. Anything that you do gently with your voice, by and large, is a good warm-up. And I'm not going to give you a didactic vocal warm-up that you should be doing. There are 1,000 of them online that you can find. Look for some that work for you. But here are some good rules of thumb. Anything that gently works most of your range, not your entire absolute range. Your warm-up should not push your range to the very, very outsides of high and low. Stay in the middle and a little bit to one side. Is the middle portion of my range. These are good. Soft. We don't want to blow. This is not filling the entire concert hall. We just want little amounts of noise. Things that restrict some of your air are also excellent because we can really make the vocal folds work without blowing so much air through them that we're asking them to work really, really hard. So vocal warm-ups as though we are breathing through a straw or actually phonating through a straw are an excellent way to gently warm up our bodies. And finally, things that cause good buzzing feels in our faces are great ways to warm up some of the accessory muscles around our mouth, our tongues, our vocal cords. Also, some great warm-ups to be done in terms of getting your face ready to both be expressive as a performer and also to produce the sounds and shapes that we want. Anything that can make your face go through some of its ranges of motion. So one of the things that we often talk about is lion face, lemon face, which is sort of an back to a ooh. It looks delightfully silly, and I encourage you to embrace being silly because part of performing is finding joy in things that sometimes people find silly. So lion face, lemon face, and maybe some tongue twisters. Move the jaw around, red leather, yellow leather, red leather, yellow leather. How much wood could a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood? He could cut a conifer if you give him a quarter for every quarter conifer he cut. While we're on the subject of vocal health, I want to just take a couple of minutes and talk about care and hydration and magic cures and myths. Hydration is the best thing that you can do for your body and for your vocal instrument. Whatever it is that you're drinking, dilute tea, weak fruit juice, water, things that can bring hydration to your body are excellent. There are things that are bad for your voice, manifestly, and I break them down into 3 S's: screaming, smoking, and swelling. And there's some more stuff. Screaming, while it can be a lot of fun at a concert or at a sporting event or just to let off some steam, is unbelievably bad for our vocal instrument. And here's why. If you are a sailor, or if you are familiar with flying flags, or if you've ever driven a pickup truck with a tarp that wasn't fully battened down, anytime you get a material that's flexible and you start flapping it in wind really hard, wherever it goes through a out and back, it gets up unbelievable speeds and forces at those moments. And that really tears soft stuff apart. Sails that aren't taut that are allowed to flap in the wind tear. Flags in strong winds are tattered at the edges. And if you drive that pickup truck to the dump without the tarp all the way battened down, by the time you get there, you've just got a whole bunch of plastic shreds. The same thing happens to our vocal instrument when we scream. We take our vocal folds, we force as much air through them as we can, and they bang back and forth in the air really, really hard, and it's incredibly damaging to that muscle tissue. You will be extremely fatigued the next day, or later that day you'll have that inability to actually say anything, and that's because you've taken those vocal fold smooth muscles and abused them pretty hard. Smoking, generally speaking, not great for our health, period, but especially bad for our vocal folds. And it really doesn't matter what you're smoking. Tobacco, marijuana, campfires. Smoke inhalation brings hot gases, which are damaging to the surface of our muscle tissue, and various toxic and caustic substances, which attack directly the surface of those vocal folds. So there's really no good way around the fact that smoking is really bad for your vocal folds. And, it's probably not great for your health anyway. So find other ways to deal with those substances if they're important to you. Swelling is something that we don't directly do to our vocal folds, but it does tend to happen in certain scenarios. Things like allergic reactions, or if you have inhaled hot gases like smoke, or hot winds from campfires, or dust and things that cause irritation, we can get swelling to our vocal folds and to the tissues of our throat. That will change our vocal folds' ability to produce sound. And not only will it sound strange, but when we work it hard in that scenario, we're also asking more of our vocal folds than they can do. So if you're feeling swollen, if you're sick, if you have an allergic reaction to something, if the allergies are up in the air, not actually a great idea. It's not a bad idea to give the vocal folds a little bit of a rest. Go easy on them, see if you can give them a little bit of work. Now, our oro and nasopharynx are the cavities that make up our head, right? So the parts where there are hollow spaces, our sinuses, our mouth, our throat, and the larynx is located at the bottom of our oropharynx before it passes into our trachea down into our lungs. Our oro and nasopharynxes are mucus-lubricated machines. Mucus, although gross, is an unbelievably amazing and useful substance. It is a lubricant, it's a cleaner, it keeps everything well hydrated. So where you have tissue that's really hard to clean, it's hard to wash off the inside of your sinuses like you can your hands. Mucus instead traps particles and dangerous things and germs, washes them down into the oropharynx where they're swallowed, and we get rid of them in our stomach. Mucus is produced by our bodies, it's controlled by our hydration, but it's also impacted by a few other things. Most people will find that there are certain foods that cause their mucus to have a different consistency. And that is really the origin of a lot of the wives' tales about what you should or should not or must not drink as a vocal performer. The reality of our oropharynx and the way that our trachea and esophagus are separated is delightfully magic. The epiglottis, as I mentioned earlier, does a great job of being a soft, flappy trap door that keeps our trachea safe. And here's the thing. If your epiglottis is doing its job, nothing that you drink is passing your vocal folds unless you're drowning. The vocal folds are sealed off. The only thing that goes down the trachea intentionally is air as we breathe it. So it doesn't really matter what you drink. It's not directly impacting your vocal folds. But it can impact the mucus production and how thick that is. A lot of people will find that dairy products, heavy oils, and things like that can have a really thickening effect on mucus. So if you hear that you're starting to get kind of a raspy, fluttery sort of sound to parts of your vocal range, that can be an indication that there's some thicker mucus you've got going on, and parts of that are actually stuck to the vocal folds. Downside is, you can't rinse them off, unless you feel like drowning, which nobody wants to do that. Various things that you drink, of course, change your hydration. So although you may hear lots of stuff about lemon water or certain teas or slippery elm or licorice root or which alcohols singers can and cannot, opera singers cannot drink dark alcohols, only light alcohols. For the most part, it's from somebody's personal experience that became absolute truth. It doesn't have any impact on your vocal folds directly, but of course it impacts your personal hydration. As a performer, you will have to do the experimentation of finding out what it is that works for you and what doesn't. Mayonnaise is really hard on me. I don't know why. I love it on my sandwiches, but it will always produce weird phlegm issues in my throat, and then I have a hard time getting a good, clean production. So it's one of the things that I know I need to avoid. Teas and hot drinks and cold drinks, absolutely delightful for keeping you hydrated. Whether it's hot or cold is a matter of personal preference. Whatever feels good to you and means that you're more likely to drink it. There's one exception to direct hydration and impacting the vocal folds, and that is cool steam. If you've got a personal steamer or a cool mist humidifier around, that will put water into the air, which you are then breathing, that will touch the surface of your vocal folds. I think it's arguable how much of that directly hydrates the muscle tissue of your vocal folds because there's mucus over them, which is going to interact with it. It may change the viscosity of the mucus, but that's not how muscles get their hydration and their nourishment. They get that through your blood supply. So again, hydrate the body, hydrate the vocal folds. We're going to talk a little bit more about the body and physical health in just a second. But let's just take a quick break and look at a diagram of the oro and nasopharynx so you can just sort of see what that looks like. So here we see a side cutaway view of our oro and nasopharynx. You'll see that here the nasal cavity, which is much bigger than most people really realize, and then below it the oral cavity, which, although that feels like our largest opening, is largely occupied by the tongue. Both of these pass backwards into the pharynx, where the epiglottis, as we mentioned before, comes down to cover over the top of the trachea, keeping it separate from the esophagus behind it. And there is the larynx, of course, at the top of which are the vocal folds, which is our magical musical instrument of the body. Okay. Got to be limber. Talk about our physical health portion. You got to be in tip-top shape to be a performer, right? Hogwash. Anyone can be a performer. The key is to perform within your physical capacity. It doesn't matter if you are a marathon runner or if you live with a disability. It doesn't matter if you are, tiny or tall or built or heavy. You can be a performer because what you really perform with is your heart and your soul. And those are beautiful in all of us. However, whatever your physical ability and benchmark is, you need to know what your body and your physical organs can do in order to use them to their fullest and know how you're going to warm them up, how you're going to work with them, and how you're going to live within who you are. So we talked a little bit about vocal warm-ups, and we're going to talk a little bit about physical exploration and warm-ups as well. Whatever your body is, explore what it can do, what it likes to do. You may find that there's a portion of performing you never even thought of that you'd really like to do. Clowning is a classic and ancient art. It's not for everybody, but maybe your body really likes to do some silly, goofy, kind of moving stuff. Maybe you like to dance. Maybe you like to do pantomime. Maybe the small motions of marionette work are what's really for you, and maybe the big dramatic movements of stage opera are your thing. Explore what your physical body can do and find what you find joy in, and work within that. Warming up your body is both about getting blood flow to places, getting your muscles warm and ready, and also finding out what is and isn't working. This is not stretching time. There's a little bit of stretching that goes on with it, but this is not working to increase our range of motion, working to increase our flexibility. We're warming up to get ourselves moving. And so simply things like getting your neck moving, getting your shoulders moving. I like to work from head to toe. I like to let the warm-up kind of flow from my head down through my body. So I move my face, I move my eyes, I move my head. And while I'm doing that, I start to let myself get into a mental space for whatever the performance is. What am I doing? Am I going to sing some silly bardic songs on stage that I wrote about life in the SCA? Am I going to just sit around the campfire and sing some songs? Certain things I warm up a lot for, certain things I don't warm up that much for. Around the campfire, shake it out, warm my hands up a little bit, warm my voice up, get some songs done. If we're going to go on stage and do Henry V, now we need some headspace. So what you're doing is going to inform how you warm up as well. So if we're doing a real performance, if we're going to go and embody a character, this is a time to not only warm up, but to start feeling our characterization come into the fore. So let our body move, find out what's good, feeling good, and what's not feeling good, and start to connect that to the performance that we're going to do. We let the mind and intent connect with the action. So as we warm up, especially if we're going to do stage work, we're going to start to think about what that person that we're portraying does, and let our intention behind the performance we're about to do start to inform how we start to move and behave. Is this person older or limited or a warrior or something? Let us embody that and start to get our movements in line with what we're going to go do. So the mind may direct our action, but our actions can also bring our mind into a ready state to do the things that we want it to do, to have the aspects that we want it to have, to convey some of the information that we want. And of course, hydration works for our body as well as our voice, right? Our voice is part of our body, but hydration is important for the whole of our being. So good sleep, good food, good exercise, good hydration. It's, we say it all the time, and we all find what it works for us in the right way for our bodies and our lives and what we're doing. But, find the joy in your physical performance and see where you can go from there. In part 2, we're going to talk about the mind, how we engage with what we do, how we find the meaning in text, how we prepare our text, and what we do with that. So stick around. We'll be back in just a second with part 2, the mind. To be or not to be? No. To be or not to be? To be or not to be? To be or not to be? What does it all mean? Let's talk about the mind and where we bring our conscious awareness of things into our work as performers. I like to talk about this in a couple different sections. Engaging with text, and then learning and memorization. So if we are performing some form of speech, and this really actually doesn't matter if we're an instrumental performer or a vocal performer, whether we are a singer or a storyteller or any combination of them, there's still something about text that we're working with, whether that's the musical score or the words that we're performing. And I'm going to talk about this from a words standpoint. But many of these same principles hold true if you are working with choreography or whether you're working with instrumentation. Engaging with text is a challenge that means primarily we need to look for what we're talking about. What are we saying? We have words. Now, what are we doing with them? And the first question that I like to talk about is looking for the why behind the word. What's the point of this text, well, the lyrics, why are we even here? What are we doing? To be or not to be? That is the question. This is a famous soliloquy that Hamlet delivers in Shakespeare's Hamlet, and it's something that has been grossly misinterpreted by a number of people, or intentionally misinterpreted by people for comedic value. But here is a speech where a character is pondering whether he should kill himself or not, whether it's even worth it to keep living. So just as those of us who may be familiar with how speech has changed shake our heads over Juliet delivering "Wherefore art thou Romeo?" and believing that that means where is Romeo, when indeed Juliet is bemoaning the fact that Romeo is Romeo, that his name, that his family mean that she can never be with him because the Montague and Capulet are forever at war. To be or not to be is an essential question of existence, of reality. So if we go into text without knowing what it means, we are unable to either deliver it properly or intentionally misdeliver it, because intentional misdelivery is another tool in our toolbox as performers. We can take something like "to be or not to be" and do what Warner Brothers did, where Bugs Bunny is delivering a "to be or not to be." Oh, you said "to be." I didn't say "to be." It was apartment 2C. We can make that joke, but only when we know what we're doing with the text in the first place. If we serve the reason for the text, if we get into what the text means, then we can deliver it. We can serve the purpose. We can let the text blossom. And for all its popularity, Shakespeare is an excellent example of text that's often very difficult to engage with because the language is very decorative. It's 400 years out of its time now. And it has both meaning and subtextual meaning that we have to really know what we're doing in order to deliver properly. But any text is that way. Are there subtle jokes in the text? Is there innuendo in the text? What are we doing with it? So we have to understand the meaning, the context, and we have to understand the other meaning, the subtext. Wherefore art thou speaking these lines? Why? Why are you speaking these lines? Know what you're saying, or what you're singing, or what you're acting. Understand what you're saying so thoroughly that it becomes natural to you to say the words. If we're singing a song, if we're playing a part, the character or the person, the narrator who's singing the song, those words need to become so natural for that performance, ideally, that we have no difficulty believing that that character would say that way. That's simply how she or he talks. So that's how we need to perform the pieces. There's also, of course, the question of subtext, of jokes within the joke, of innuendo, nudge, nudge, grin, grin, wink, wink, right? So what else are you saying? Henry V, right? There's a delightful exchange of lines between the people at the tavern house where Prince Harry is wont to go when Falstaff has died, which is in terms of, they say he cried out of sack. No, he didn't, or that he did, and they say he cried out of women. No, that he did not. Aye, that he did, yeah, he said they were devils incarnate. No, but he could never abide carnation. It was a colour he never liked. There's a lot there, and it goes by really fast, but it's so cute and it's so funny. He cried out of sack. Well, sack is sweet wine, right? He denounced the drink in his last hours. Yeah, aye, that he did, yeah. And of women. Aye, he did not. Aye, that he did, yeah. He said they were devils incarnate. Well, he never could abide carnation. It's a color, right? So it's a wordplay joke. We have to enjoy those, and we have to get them into our skin and into our soul so that we love the taste of them in our mouth. And we know how it's going to come out. We know why we're saying what we're saying. So studying the text, looking at people's interpretation of it, what some of the explanations of it, particularly if we're going to look at Chaucer, or if it's text in a language we don't natively speak, even if you're pretty good at Icelandic, Old Icelandic, if we're going to do, some of the skaldic saga in them, has got its own twists and turns. And when it's translated or transliterated, then we also need to look for what's going on there. How has that happened? What is the translator telling us about the original piece? There's almost not such a thing as being too prepared for approaching a piece, which is not the same as over-rehearsing it. There's preparation is what goes into it before you start rehearsing the piece, and rehearsing is actually practicing the performance itself. And you can get your performance to the point that it's over-rehearsed, where we come back out of the naturalness and into woodenness, where we're so aware of exactly what we're going to say that we're not thinking about it anymore. And then we stop having reality, we stop having a sense of vibrancy to what we're saying. And that leads me into talking about learning and memorization. And they're two different things, and sometimes one is more appropriate than the other. So the question that I would ask you is to think about when to nail it and when to know it. What does the piece require? Are we delivering a piece of poetry where each word has been placed with exacting care? The length of the lines, the number of syllables or beats is extremely important. That's a piece that we have to nail. We have to have the words in exactly the right order, the exact words that were written. Maybe a piece of prose or a piece of stage, if there's a relatively long piece. Do we have to hit absolutely every word exactly as it was written? Or is it more important to be so steeped in the meaning of the piece, so attached to what we're saying, that we deliver it with vitality, with belief, with earnestness, and maybe we slightly changed a word or two, and that's okay. So poetry versus prose, song versus stage. Is this horseshoes we're close enough, good enough? Or is it holding hands where we're either holding hands or we're not? That's a question that has to be answered for every piece that you're preparing, and it's really worth looking at. So how do you learn? Or how do you memorize? Well, there's a lot of different methods, and you have to know a little bit about how you, as a person, tend to learn something. When I read text, I get the big, really surface level, 1,000-foot kind of view of it, and that's what I remember of it. But I don't remember a lot of the details. I remember, oh, it was a story about X and Y, and they went here and did what. When I hear something, I personally get it so much better. I get the nuance, I get the cadence, and I get the rhythm of things, and I start to really hear that. It sinks in. So I do best if I listen and read and then listen a couple of times. But maybe, maybe you're a visual learner, maybe you're an oral learner. Do you have to do a rote from the top to the bottom? Do you do better if you bite it off into sections? So there are things that you will have to explore as a performer to decide how you're going to approach learning that piece. There are some interesting tricks that you can use to engage different portions of your brain while you're learning some portions, though. For example, listening to something while doing chores often can take part of your brain and focus it on other things while you're taking in stuff in a different way. If you are reading, if you're a visual learner, listening to instrumental music while you do it is often a good way to work. There's an old trick from the stage that I actually do find remarkably effective, although it's very silly looking, and that is to put a recording of the part on and speak along to it while crawling around on the floor. We did weird stuff in stage. It's the theory behind it that I've heard is that it engages a physical portion of your body and removes sort of the animal portion of your mind, while the rest of it is engaged in hearing and learning the part. I don't know, it does seem to work pretty well though. So the mental aspect of approaching your piece is all about thinking about what it is that you're doing, what your goal is, what you are aiming to have as a result. Are you aiming to inform, to entertain, to get laughter, to get tears? How much do you have to consciously decide where there's going to be different emotional aspects of the piece? Or do you want to make sure that you evoke a very specific stylistic choice? Are you entering a competition for judged arts and sciences piece where you need to perform a 12th century choral piece with a believably period aspect, and so your biggest concern is making sure that you have the lyric flow, that you've gotten the Latin properly, if that's what you're doing. So that is the portion where you need to sit down and meet the piece, shake hands with the piece, learn all about it, take it out for dinner, find out what it's all about, find out what it wants, where it's going, where it's come from, and get to really know it so that you hit that point of delivering the text with belief and with knowledge so that it feels natural to you, it'll seem natural to your audience. And this also is a good time to mention, particularly if you're going to be working in stage with other people, where there's dialogue back and forth. The mental preparation for this includes being mentally present during your performance such that you create a conversation and not an exchange of monologue. The biggest joy that you can find as a performer and the biggest gift to your audience will be when you can find moments of discovery in the text and performance. And what I mean by that is reaching a point of connection with the performance, with the text, with the song, that you are learning things at the same time that the character that you are performing is learning things. That when your partner in a scene says something, you can feel a sense as the performing person in that character of hearing that for the first time, because that creates that element of realism, that believability of spontaneity, that sense of discovery that gives us truly amazing performances. It is one of those things that is something we always reach for and probably never perfectly attain, but it's a really great thing to try for as we're working on our performance skills and how we approach things. So in section 3, our last section before a little bit of a wrap up, we're going to talk about the spirit that we bring to performance. And that's an important place to talk about things like how we deal with stage fright, how we deal with having stage presence and all of those sorts of things. So we'll take a quick break. I'll be back at section 3, spirit. Well, for the final section, I'd like to talk about the spirit of performance. Now, this is both what you bring in your heart to the performance, touching my microphone, and the things that sometimes can stand in your way in a performance. So let's talk about presence, first of all. I'd like to think of this in a number of different ways. Here's one example: 4 coronations and a funeral. Those are going to be 5 very different things, but 4 of them are more similar than one of the other ones. We need to think about what it is that we're performing that we're going to bring it together with. So we need to remember the scene from Robin Hood Men in Tights in terms of maybe if you told me the bad news in a good way, it wouldn't seem so bad. Well, sometimes that makes sense, and sometimes we're bringing the wrong energy to a performance for what we're trying to bring across. Hey, to be or not to be? Boy, that's the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or take arms against a sea of troubles and by oppose and end them. It's a choice to bring to a speech about suicide. So, there's a rule of thumb, right, in theater: never wear a duck suit to a funeral, unless it's that type of funeral, okay? We have to bring the proper energy to a piece that we want to convey to it. So if we're bringing a comedic piece, we need to bring our up energy. We need to find the way to slide it in properly. Are we giving a little bit of a nudge to the side? Are we going to flirt with the audience a little bit? Are we bringing an ode? Are we bringing something about those on high where we want to bring big energy? Are we bringing tender energy? Are we talking about the changeling child and the desire to have a babe in arms that is all one ever has? Are we talking about the downfall of humanity? Are we talking about the sacrifice of the noble? The thing about performing is that we never perform alone. Our audience is always right there, even when they're not. We're not right here, right now. You're not right here, right now, but you are in my mind. This is my living room with cameras and stuff all set up. So we're not here to talk to. There isn't a class here. And when we're on Zoom performances, the audience is not right there reacting to us. But performance is never done in a vacuum, even on Zoom. We give our energy forth, and we know in our hearts that that energy is being taken in. And the more energy we bring, the more energy will come back to us. Now, there's no denying that live performance has the most energy, because every time you bring the energy forth, the audience will return that energy to you, and it becomes a feedback loop. So it's important to find your ability to live within that energy, let the audience feed you without letting the audience rule you. There's nothing that that musicians will tell you that can be more delightful and horrible than when the audience starts clapping along, right? Partly because the audience is notorious for not keeping in time. When you clap along, it starts to speed up, and it's a lot of work for musical groups to keep the tempo, keep it on track, take that energy, but don't let them run away with you. So there's a lot to be done in terms of finding your balance with your energy and finding the joy, finding the fire, finding the connection to the text that we talked about in the mind section is a thing that can give you a lot of gifts in terms of having that energy, having the interplay with your audience. And when you have an audience that's digital, you have to let the imaginary audience fill your heart. So open yourself up to the performance. Open yourself up to the joy or the sadness or the anger or the amazement of the performance, and let that be part of the energy that comes back to you, because there is an audience out there, maybe at multiple times, that will be giving you energy back. It's just out there in the world, and you're not going to be able to just see it and grab it. You're going to have to go reaching for it a little bit with your soul. But it's there, and you can find it. The other thing that really is an important point for a lot of people is stage fright and imposter syndrome. Stage fright is a real thing, okay? Being up on stage, being in front of people, having everybody look at you is something that's incredibly intimidating. That can be good. A little bit of that frisson of, oh my gosh, is something that you can use to build the energy and build the power and the presence for yourself. But you get into things like, okay, what's about to come out of my mouth? Is it words? Is it something else? If it's words, is it going to be the words that I memorized? Oh, I don't feel so good. Confidence is a muscle. Okay, it's not. Confidence is an ephemeral thing. It's a concept. But go with the analogy here. Confidence is a muscle. You have to exercise it, and it will get bigger. And honestly, fake it till you make it really does work in the performing world. I mean, after all, we are performers. I can perform the act of being confident, and all of a sudden, it starts to take over. It starts to really, be a self-fulfilling thing. So finding your confidence, even if you have to paste it on, is a thing that can really work. There's a lot of different, imagine the audience naked, imagine that you're doing this. That might work for you. You may have to experiment with that. But I'll tell you something that is a delightful thing, and I think works better for me than anything else, and that is that the audience wants you to succeed. The audience wants you to do well. They want you to be there. I challenge you to think of when you have been to a performance. Let's say if you have never gone to a circus performance, go to a circus performance. And I don't mean a circus, I mean a performance of the circus arts. They're amazing. And inevitably, with most of them, somebody will mess something up, right? A juggler drops a ball. Somebody doesn't quite stick a landing on something. And juggling is a great example. The last time I watched an amazing juggling act, the juggler dropped one a couple of times. And we, as the audience, were rooting for him to nail it. And when he got that third time, it was a hard trick. Everybody cheered. He screwed up. He didn't do it perfectly. And we didn't care. We want it to work. So take the gift that the audience is giving you of wanting you to succeed and believe in it. We love it when people succeed. I have never met an audience that went into a show going, I can't wait to see them screw up and I'm going to laugh at them. Right? I mean, with the exception of Statler and Waldorf sitting in the Muppet Theater and, enjoying heckling people, hecklers really aren't that common. And they're more common in stand-up comedy. And I got to be honest, if you want to be a stand-up comedian, get good at dealing with confidence and heckling, because that's possibly a thing. But most of your performances, the songs, the singing, what was I saying? If you forget a line, people will be okay with it. Just don't beat yourself up publicly for it, because that will also inform people about what you want from them. Your audience will give you what you ask for. If you ask for denouncement and to be criticized for things, if you take the moment to say, oh God, I should have prepared more. I had this yesterday. I'm so shit at this. I can't even. Why are you even watching me? I don't know why I'm here. Your audience will do that for you. They will be disappointed in your behavior. They will be taken out of the performance by your making it about the fact that you messed up. If instead you get to a point where you're like, there's another verse here. And then she went across, and if they will laugh and no one will care. The performance will still be great. So take the permission to screw up. Just do it with love and do it with energy and move it right along. Imposter syndrome, if you're not familiar with imposter syndrome, who are you and how do you do that? Because I would love to know. Imposter syndrome is rampant. It is that sense that they're going to find out I'm a fake. They're going to find out I don't belong here. Someone is going to realize that I conned my way into this, that I don't know what I'm doing. It's going to be terrible and it's all going to fall apart. I'm not supposed to be here. Well, you know what? You are supposed to be here. You're supposed to be here, and I'm supposed to be here, and anyone who wants to be here is supposed to be here. And we all want you to be here. Your fellow performers want you to be here. Your audience wants you to be here. Your friends want you to be here. Even when they're not here and you're there, they want you to be there. You belong here because we are human. And one of the things that makes us human is telling stories. And that's what performing is, sharing our stories. That doesn't mean only storytelling. It's all stories. Every dance, every painting, every song, every story, every stage play, every movie is a story or a series of stories. You belong because you're human. Stories are yours. They are the birthright of every human being. And we all have a part in them. So you belong as part of the story. We all feel imposter syndrome. Bardic laurels feel imposter syndrome. People who work as professional actors feel imposter syndrome. We get up there and go, God, what am I? I'm not qualified for this. What am I? Of course you're not. And of course you are. Because your qualification for this is being human. And the perfect person for something doesn't exist. So you do belong. You are valued. And people want you to do well. I want you to do well. Your audience wants you to do well. Your friends and your fellow performers want you to do well. And you belong here. So let your spirit be enriched by performance, and let your spirit enrich the performance. Thank you so much for joining me today. This is the 3 sections that I had to talk to you about: the body, the mind, the spirit, some very basic things that go into creating our foundation as a performer, the things that stand in our way, the things that we can do to help ourselves. I would love to hear from you if you have questions, if you want to reach out and connect. You can get me via email at gavinkent@gmail.com. You can find me on a blog that I am shamefully neglecting. I need to do more with, bardgavinkent.blogspot.com and Bard Gavin Kent on Facebook. I'm so delighted that you are choosing to be a part of Penzic University Virtual, and I'm so glad that I could be here today. I hope that your performances are brilliant, that you challenge yourself, that you see new performances that inspire you, and that you choose to share your stories with more people. Have a great day, and thanks for being here.